Hello again. We are rejoining Darian right where we left off. Off camera, what I did was just kind of go through and talk to a couple people. I didn't talk to Anevia though, so let's go ahead and do that. Oh hey, see how they patched me up? Now I can run, jump, and dance a jig if I feel like it. Are there any suspicious places in this city I should pay attention to? There were a couple spots I wanted to check out, but I didn't have time. If there really is a den of cultists, it would be a good idea to swoop in there and bust some heads. You don't even need a search warrant. The first one is the Silken Thread. It's a funny little tailor shop that doesn't take any orders and never buys any fabric, but they always seem oh so busy. They're busy with something in there alright, but sewing it ain't. Alright, we got an area revealed. The second one is an alchemy shop. Topaz Solutions. They trade in everything, not just healing potions. Judging by the ingredients I've been buying on the black market, there's something fishy about the alchemical rituals going on in that place. So then that place has been revealed. Tell me about yourself. I'd be happy to, but there ain't nothing to tell. What's so interesting about me? Where you from? Nowhere. I was blown in by the wind and found in a cabbage patch. Sorry, that's an old habit of mine. I don't like babbling about my past, but you saved my skin, so I guess I kind of owe it to you not to clown around, right? I'm from Nidal, but I wouldn't wish my homeland on my worst enemy. You've heard of the place, I'm sure, ruled by monsters that aren't alive nor dead, and the official religion is the cult of Zon Cathon. I grew up in a slum like a weed between the cobblestones. I didn't have a dad, but I had lots of aunts and uncles, my mom's cronies. No prize for guessing what kind of business she was involved in. They gave me a set of lockpicks as soon as I could hold a spoon, and while other kids were picking their noses, I was picking pockets. When I was 12, the monks of the Silent Shroud came for us. Creepy guys with their mouths sewn shut. They're the guards in Nisrock. Mom gave me to her friends, and we hid in a secret temple of Desna. I never saw my mom again. I lay low in the temple for the next few years. I kept my head down, washed floors, fetched water, listened to sermons. Funny thing, after a while, I started liking Desna's teachings. As soon as I was old enough, I was out of there. I left Nidal and got as far away as I could. Quite a ragtag group you've got here, from nobles to street thieves. You've got that right. Haha, only the best for you. What do you do if the knights and nobles fail to save the world? The lowlives are our only hope. How did you meet Irabeth? I was bumming around Timon a while back, doing this and that. Desnan temples sometimes gave me odd jobs, you know. Sometimes they needed people with skills like mine. On the surface, it was fine, I guess. After Nidal, the freedom of the river kingdoms should have seemed like heaven, my chance to sit back and enjoy life, but I wasn't happy. There just wasn't any joy in my new life. I was all alone. No one cared about me, and I didn't care about anybody either. I struggled to find a reason to drag myself out of bed every morning. Tying a stone around my neck and jumping into the nearest river started looking pretty appealing. One day, I was hired to follow some fellas who the local authorities suspected were Razmarin spies. I was stupid. I made a rookie mistake and they caught me. It's like my body had already decided to do what my mind had been fighting, to finally put me out of my misery. Get someone else to kill me, since I didn't have the guts to do it myself. They grabbed me. I thought they'd gut me on the spot, but instead they hog-tied me and dragged me off, just like an animal going to the slaughter. My only thought was, let's get this over with. They brought me to their stinking cave, threw me on their altar, and I realized who it was. Kuthoites from Nidal. They'd tracked me down after all those years, but I didn't care anymore. Wouldn't have cared if they'd eaten me or whatever. We all gotta go sometime, right? So I was laying there, staring at those knives pointed at me, when fate rolled the dice and I hit the jackpot. Irabeth, there she was, storming into the cave. Picture it, I'm lying on an altar with all these knife-wielding maniacs around me, and suddenly Erebeth storms in. I thought she was Iomade herself, fierce in her shining armor with her gleaming sword. She made quick work of those scumbags, chopped them up just like that. I didn't even have time to blink. She untied me, and then she looked through the papers they had on the table and started swearing like a sailor. So much for Iomade. How did you and Erebeth end up in Canabras? After almost becoming a human sacrifice, I knew I never wanted to leave Erebeth's side. Desna knows I fell for her instantly, and I fell hard. My misery was gone, and when Erebeth showed me what was in those papers, proof that the cultist had a nest in her home city, well, I offered to help without a second thought. She must have figured I couldn't wait to get my revenge on the cultists, but I didn't give a damn about them. It was her. I'd go anywhere with her, even on a crusade or into the jaws of a dragon. But I took to life in Canabras like a duck to water. I used to be an outcast wherever I went, but half the crusaders are the same. After all, who'd volunteer to tangle with demons on the edge of the abyss? You gotta be either a goody two-shoes with too much honor and free time, or a misfit with no life out in the normal world with normal people. People come here to run away from their debts, their past, from themselves, so I fit right in. What's it like living with Erebeth? It's like living. Without her, I wouldn't be. Seriously, if I were alone, I'd definitely be gone by now. Sure, sometimes we argue, can't deny that. Sometimes we bang our fists on the table and yell so loud that the walls shake. But that's all about order business. But at home, well, I'll give you an example. I've kind of always wanted to move out of that broom closet we call a house into something cozier. It ain't like they take a vow of poverty at the Eagle Watch. But every month, somehow, most of our spare money is spent on crusader business. Sure, I get mad about it, but it's part of why I love her so much. You know, Erebeth has that thing that matters most for a person, a purpose in life. She's always got a reason for whatever she's doing. Her whole life is a crusade, and I just drifted around like a leaf in the wind until Desna brought us together. Now she's the meaning of my life, so it really makes no difference if we live in a mansion or under a bush. Thank you for your answers. What are your responsibilities in the Eagle Watch? Nothing official. I'm not even a knight, you know. I just hang around. You sure you want to know the details? Catching traitors and cultists is no walk in the park. It's a delicate job. You can't always do it all within the letter of the law. What if we surprise some suspicious blighter with an official search? Everyone will know about it before long, starting with their cronies. Then again, sneaking into people's houses at night isn't exactly legal. Crusaders can't be doing stuff like that, can they? Well, I'm not exactly a knight. I have to go. Right. Let's talk to you. Let's talk to Indra. Okay. I hope this example clearly illustrates the difference between Jistka legionnaires from the last war and the Crusaders. The perfection of form and spirit they were imbued with during the creation turned them into parts of a well-balanced war machine, not a ragtag bunch of individuals, but a united whole. Now tell me again why I'm supposed to be impressed by your reckless assaults where everyone is fighting for their ego and for the right to beat their peers to a swift but pointless heroic sacrifice. Quietly listen to the discussion. If those gists of yours, or whatever, had come for us, we'd have their guts for garters. You think we've never fought a mighty adversary before? I would love to see you storm a 60-foot-tall walking castle shaped like a giant elephant that carries siege fortifications on its back. And I'll have you know these fortifications were defended by Jitskin priest craftsmen armed with demon-bound war machines. They used enemies you cannot defeat as mindless weapons. You should not argue with someone who happens to be from the most authoritative researcher on the history of warfare 3,000 years before the foundation of Absalom. The lecture is over. Do my esteemed listeners have any questions? Who are you? I am Indara, a warrior, magus, and scholar of classical warfare from Garund. I admit that I am mildly offended by the fact that my name is entirely unfamiliar to you, but I'm willing to accept that this is due to Astavan's isolation from the sophisticated culture of the world at large. Avestan. You've come a long way to be here. I like to think of myself as an inhabitant of Galarian, and I don't narrowly identify with any country in particular. Why did you come here? To witness a legendary war, the confrontation between denizens of a plain famous for its love of violence and the crusaders from every continent, united by a common goal of defending their home, an epic struggle of colossal proportions. That hasn't been particularly epic so far, truth be told. Maybe she just can't see it from here. The view will get more epic if she stops hiding among us and takes a walk outside. It looks like you know more about warfare than any of us. Oh, am I hearing things, or did someone finally acknowledge my competence in the art of warfare? Perhaps there is a sufficiently open-minded person among the Crusaders after all. I find myself pleasantly surprised. What is this last war you mentioned? The last war of Jistka, of course, a large-scale conflict that took place 3,000 years before the foundation of Absalom. It was a war against the Osrian pharaoh of Forgotten Plagues. The war ended the legendary Jitska Imperium, an epic struggle that became the most vibrant page in military history. Alas, all conflicts that followed it were but pale shadow, including the one I am currently witnessing here. Why do you find the last war of Jitska inspiring? Imagine legions of golems imbued with extraplanar spirits marching into battle. Imagine flying cities that swoop out of the clouds like terrifying monstrous birds of prey to drop forces on top of enemy castles. Picture gigantic mechanisms powered by captive and very angry demons and devils. Imagine standing in the warpath of walking citadels, or having to cover your ears to block out the sound of cannons loaded with shrieking elementals. Finally, imagine the ultimate weapon that defeated the Jitska, the deadly night plague. This affliction was an attack dog, a trained epidemic, a tamed pestilence, striking only those who its master wanted to kill. Imagine all these terrors and understand that no flight of fancy can even come close to the horror of the nightmares that they made real. How do you know so much about Jitska's last war? I can say without false modesty that there is no more authoritative researcher on Galarian when it comes to the history of warfare 3,000 years before the foundation of Absalom. I've dedicated my whole life to this subject. I've personally visited the old battlefields and studied the most mysterious and forbidden archives containing chronicles of ancient wars, sometimes risking my life in the process. I saw a fallen sky city of the Shori Empire with my own eyes. I ripped out the control crystal from an exterminator-class combat golem that guarded a Jitska laboratory with my own hands. These fingers held the glass flask of Pharaoh of Forgotten Plagues, used to create the first generation of pestilence that devastated the Jitska Imperium. How do I know so much? I saw and touched everything I am telling you about. Why don't you join the Crusaders and show them how fighting should be done? No. I am a historian, an analyst, a theorist. Do you know what these three words have in common? They describe a mortal woman who does not participate in the conflict upon which her thesis will be founded. Then again, I am hardly able to describe this mess as anything other than a feeble likeness of the last war of Jitska. The more dangerous the upcoming scuffle is, the more motivated we are to find clever and pretty words to justify not actually doing the fighting. You're wrong to treat the Crusaders with such disdain. Allow me to explain. A debate. Oh, I will be happy to prove that the current conflict can't hold a candle to the last war of Jitska. Very well. The last war of Jitska was waged using a significantly greater number of troops. Both sides actively relied on reinforcements from Allied planes, and their strategic planning was perfected through no fewer than 7 rounds of intensive design. None of the above applies to this war of yours. Compared to Jitska, we are but bone-wielding kobolds. I would like to conclude my thesis with a few words of wise counsel from Dagon, an advisor to the Pharaoh of Forgotten Plagues. I doubt you will comprehend the true genius of this statement, but here it is nevertheless. A gadfly sees the ox pays no heed to the gadfly, but crimson fever takes them both. So I would have to roll a 1 to not pass this. The events of the past are shrouded in legend, but the fate of the world is being decided here and now. That is what you failed to grasp. Of course, I'm not trying to diminish the importance of current events. What I'm trying to say is that from the standpoint of history, and in particularly the history of warfare, the true importance of these developments won't become obvious until later. As a scholar, I cannot deny there is a certain truth beneath your skeptical statements. History is a complex discipline rooted in fact and an evidentiary base that grows ever more meager the further the described period is from the present moment. Of course, if I were to argue in bad faith, the way Crusaders embellished their tales of slaying a single Brimarak by adding dozens of Balors, for example, I could win this debate, but I am above such things, and therefore I am forced to admit that your skepticism is not entirely without merit. Have you changed your mind about joining the Crusaders? I'm sure you would have been able to expound on your arguments in a longer discussion. I'm glad we both understand this limitation. It is always a pleasure to face a worthy opponent, even if the debate takes place in a grimy tavern. Perhaps especially because of that. She unbuckles her sword belt and hands you the weapon. This is a worthy blade. It will be of use not only for the strong, but also for the wise. Cool. And this is where I bid you farewell. Before the end of the day, I was planning to observe how winged demons use pack tactics to drive their prey like herds of livestock. It is about time I got back to my research. Stay safe. Interesting. What did we get? Claw of Jitska. Short sword. Flaming short sword with a +1 enhancement. Nice. Okay. Cool. I don't have anybody that can really use that right now, but nice to have. Well, there's some loot. Again, I'm not going to read all this loot. It's just too much to read, but I will at least put it on the screen so you can read it if you would like. Let's talk to Erebeth. Any success? Housed city. What is our main objective? You heard what the demons said. They're going to desecrate the Wardstone and blow up the whole barrier around the world wound. That would be an even worse disaster than the world wound's expansion before the Second Crusade. Not only for Canabras, but every city with a Wardstone will be destroyed, including the capital. We can't allow that no matter what. We will retake it, even destroy it if we must. Iomede's gift must not become a weapon of the abyss. I feel like we've heard this. These Wardstones, where are they? They are our greatest treasure, the shield given to us by Iomede herself, and placed in Canabras and other Mendevian cities and fortresses by her herald. The chain of Wardstones forms a protective barrier that stops the expansion of the world wound and keeps demons from moving beyond its borders. I shudder to think what will happen if the barrier falls. Allow me to ask a few personal questions. Please, but I must warn you, there are some things I don't have the right to discuss. Where are you from? I was born in Canabras. I grew up on a farm just outside of it. But my way back home lay at the end of a long, winding road. It took me years of traveling through foreign lands before I came to be where I've always belonged. How did you become a paladin? I don't much like to remember it, believe it or not. The story of how I became a paladin is also the story of how I failed to become a knight. My parents were crusaders, may their souls stand together in Iomede's celestial army. When I was born, they retired from the war and started preparing me to continue their legacy. But my father was an orc. He'd be pressed to find a calmer, wiser, and more pious servant of the goddess than he. But still, all his life he was dogged by sideways looks and whispers. When I grew older, it was time for me to serve. I decided anywhere but Canabras. That was where my father had served loyally, and his only reward had been injustice. Besides, the witch hunters, led by honorable paladin Halrun, stalked the city. Oh. With a heavy hand. Who knows what they'd have done to a strange girl with green skin. Instead, I went to... You can laugh if you want, but I was young and foolish. I chose Lastwell of all places. Can you imagine how well I was accepted in a country that's been battling the orcs of Belkzen since its foundation? There were many there like me, but they were all treated as second-class citizens. To the locals, my green skin was worse than leper scabs. Even my brothers in faith kept their distance. I took my vows, and the goddess granted me the powers of a paladin. But even then, not a single order would accept me into their ranks. I spent another 6 months knocking on doors before I realized a simple truth. I serve Iomede, not these people. I don't have to prostrate myself before them, so I left, as a paladin, but not a knight. Things are bound to be tough for you too. Most common folk fear death and hate the undead even more than they do orcs. I'm sure you're no stranger to the sideways looks and whispers behind your back. How did you come to join a knightly order? I left Lastwell and went traveling. The goddess guided me and led me to where atrocities were happening. I often fought in exchange for gold, but never for unworthy aims, of course. I wandered the river kingdoms for a few years, killing monsters and tracking down criminals. Sometimes I thought I was just wasting time, that my true place was in Canabras. But I pushed those thoughts away. I didn't even want to think about going back. But in the end, divine providence had brought me to my senses. It happened in Timon. I was tracking a gang of bandits, which my employer suspected was a cover for Rasmiran spies. I managed to find their lair, but inside I found something far more dangerous than spies, an unholy an unholy temple to Zon Kuthon. When I broke in there, the cultists were about to sacrifice someone, the person who was destined to become my wife, Anevia, but that's another story. After I cut down the cultists, I examined their papers and couldn't believe my eyes. A network of evil cults had spread through all of Astavan, including Mendev. Worse, the documents clearly showed that their allies, the temples of the Ivory Labyrinth, had infested my native Canabras. They were even among the ranks of the paladins. After that, delaying my homecoming would be tantamount to desertion. Luckily, I was no longer alone. Anevia was as eager to destroy the cultist as I was. Anevia and I hurried to Canabras. We couldn't trust anyone. The papers indicated that the cultists had infiltrated everything. Luckily, I had some experience in investigation, and my beloved, she knew her way around working locks and tailing people and trading information with the city's bottom feeders. Soon, we defeated, alas, not the whole Hydra, but a few of its heads. Do you know who turned out to be the leader of the cultists? The commander of the Eagle Watch. Can you imagine? While Prelate Helrune was chasing witches through the city, the enemy had infiltrated the very order responsible for internal security. The scandal reached the ears of the Queen. At first, she had planned to disband the order in disgrace, but then she offered its command to me and put its salvation in my hands. Of course, there was one small catch. I wasn't a knight, but I was made commander just the same, skipping the usual progression through its ranks. How did the people of Canabras feel about your background? They tolerated it surprisingly well. I shouldn't have been so wary. Crusaders don't tend to be prejudiced as a rule. After all, heroes from all over the world, even from other continents, come here to fight the demons. Apparently, the people were only suspicious of full-blooded orcs. There were already many like me here, and we don't have any problems. Though the locals do have their superstitions, Mendev is as merciless as Lastwell. They just have a different set of victims. I kept seeing those sideways looks and scowls, hearing the familiar whispers, but where once they used to whisper behind my back and point at me, now they whisper in my ear and point at someone else. It's so strange to be on the other side of humiliation, to wipe the spit from your face and suddenly be invited to change position and spit at someone else. You must have figured out by now, I'm talking about tieflings. It's true there are many of them among the cultists and few among our crusaders, and our fighters do all they can to drive away those who would be our allies. People shun them, call them Arilu's spawn, or worse, as if they chose to be born like that. I believe it's quite a feat to rise against the call of one's blood and join the forces of good. Still, most only see them as the enemy. I once saw a knight bleeding to death because he wouldn't let a tiefling priest touch his wound. Alas, I haven't been able to change this in all my time in Canabras. Tell me about Anevia. We met in Timon as I was wandering aimlessly from one ordeal to another. We returned to Canabras together to expose the Templars of the Ivory Labyrinth. The day the Queen knighted me was the second happiest day of my life. First was the day of our wedding. But Anevia isn't just my beloved. She's my staunchest ally. We share every victory and defeat. The best of me is alive thanks to her. Thank you for saving her back then, the day Canabras fell. Before her return, the only thing giving me the strength to protect the defender's heart was the hope that I'd see her again. We are in your debt. Thank you for your answers. Tell me about the Eagle Watch. It was a small order, created to fight not only demons, but also the enemy within, to maintain the purity of the paladin ranks, prevent heresy, and identify spies. And it failed miserably at that. The Templars of the Ivory Labyrinth infiltrated it and formed their nest within its ranks. After the Queen entrusted me with leading the order, Nevi and I practically built it from scratch. We got rid of dead weight, people who weren't committed. We organized ways to transmit messages and orders safely. We introduced reliable ciphers. We found tacit allies around the city, from crusader orders to street beggars. This was my personal crusade to purge the city of the Templars who had infested it. And I thought I was winning. I could feel it. We were so close to driving the cultists out of Canabras, but it's hard to admit, but those successes didn't count for much once the demons entered the city. On the contrary, if it wasn't for you, there wouldn't be a headquarters at the Defender's Heart. The cultists would have served up the city on a platter to the demons. Yes, that's true. It's a good thing we achieved something. Thank you. I have to go. Again, I may be an evil character, but I'm not an asshole. So I think I talked to Camellia. I didn't. Alright. Let's talk to her, and then I think I will probably wrap this episode up. Tell me about yourself. You want to know more about me than you already do? Why? I talked to the spirits of this tormented land, and they guide me in battle. I'll help you fight the demons, and I swear that you can rely on me in this matter. Isn't that sufficient? Where did you learn to wield a rapier so well? I had good teachers, although they don't get all the credit. I am a most diligent student. Your amulet is quite unusual. Where did you get it? Ah, my little trinket. It's so nice of you to notice, but I assure you, this amulet is nothing but a bauble. Can a lady not be drawn to beautiful, useless things? Anyway, as much as I enjoy our delightful conversations, the spirits are calling me, and I must respond. Please excuse me. Okay. Let's go ahead and hear. And just dump off some of the stuff that I'm not using. Keep one of these. Yeah, I'll keep the rest of it. That's the stuff that I just want to keep. Alright. Alright, I am going to cut the episode there. I know not much happened, but we got quite a bit of backstory on a couple characters. Thanks a lot.